This meeting is being live streamed. What? Hey, everybody. It's the weekly roundup for April 7th. It's Carol's birthday. Happy birthday, Carol. That's why she's not here. We miss you. But super glad to be here with Alex and Terry, and we've got some fun things to talk about with you today. Alex was just telling us about a New York Times article that I think we're going to put the link in the comments for you in a bit, that he was reading about kind of a unique take on boutique fitness. So take it away, Alex. What did you read about?
Yeah, hey everyone. The article was about creating exclusive gyms, which also included yoga classes and massage and all types of therapies. And it was an interesting model based on the fact that there was like an interview process to the clients. You had to be referred to the boutique fitness space. And of course, the monthly membership was really high. So it was limiting as far as like who's available to the studio, meaning minimum of $300 a membership up to $3,000 a month, very high touch, low volume. And as many studios know, that we kind of rely on a lower touch, higher volume experience to be able to pay our rent and our fixed costs and handle the classes and offer a variety of services. And so it just made me think about like what is going to be the new yoga studio model in the future and how is it morphed? And often we don't really know until we look back 10 years, 20 years, et cetera, how things have changed. And it also made me think about how we integrate into our existing communities. In other words, if we are teaching things that like we open a studio and we're teaching something that the demographic is not necessarily receptive to, and we see a studio 5 miles away that's very successful with bodies in the space, in other words, volume, and maybe they're teaching something that is more aligned with the demographic. So in other words, if you've been open for a few years or you're thinking about opening a studio, I think it's really important to recognize the demographic that you're going to be teaching. And of course, the service you're going to be teaching, and will that community be receptive to it? So a lot of things come into mind is, I think sometimes we as a studio owner, there's always a sense of urgency to fill your classes, to pay your teachers, to be able to pay your fixed costs. And sometimes we are surprised by like a new service that we see pop up in a studio, specifically a yoga studio, that's really successful. And, how do we not compromise our ideal as a studio owner, but at the same time integrate into our community and help them regardless of what they're receptive to? So it just brought up a lot of ideas. It's a cool article. And if you're thinking about opening a studio, you might, depending on your demographic, you might start thinking about, like, I'd be interested to know what people are doing with respect to like different models, like maybe smaller spaces, an exclusive group of, 10 or 20-year teachers, higher pay. It just makes me think about a lot of things. So kick it off from there.
It's so interesting. And I think there are, like one thing that comes up for me is like, okay, good for those studios, like own it. And that was not our studio at all, right? We were very much like, probably at those studios in New York, you're not going to see the owner like at the front desk nursing a baby and like,
Right.
So that kind of really casual feel was much more where we were like very family friendly. We were like, we'd throw parties and stuff like that. And it was we knew the first name of every single person who came in. So in that way, it was kind of like this high touch, like very customer service oriented place too, but definitely not on the high end. So, and I think that a lot of studios tend to calibrate more towards that because we all believe that like yoga, we want everybody to do yoga, right? So many studios have as one of their core values, inclusivity. And they want, we're always talking to clients about like having free classes or donation classes and how do you do that and still be like a successful business, because really like we just want to like share yoga with everybody, right? So but whatever kind of studio, whatever kind of place you want to be, I think like own it. But there are like lessons in there in what you were saying for any type of studio, whether you're trying to be like high end or we were talking before the call, like a working man's studio. I don't want to call it low end. One of the things is creating scarcity, right? So like whether you do that through like actually having an interview process to qualify to be one of your students and like only having a limited amount of space or something. There's other ways you can do that. We think about like, if you ever offer a deal on an annual, we often talk about limiting that, right? So there's only like 3 or 5 of these available. Having an actual limit to the spots in your room, even if you've got a huge room and you can fit like 60 people, like don't just let as many people come in, like actually have a maximum posted that people know, like I got to reserve my spot. Those are just a couple of examples. Another thing is like people buy their aspirational identity. So what you were talking about, like, what does your demographic want? Right. So like if you're in a really like, I don't know New York that well, but I feel like, is it like Fifth Avenue or something? Like you're in like this high class part of town and maybe like you need to have $300 yoga shorts because people buy their aspirational identity. If you're selling like pre-loved yoga shorts like we did that I bought at Goodwill and then sold in the studio for $10, that's probably not going to fly in that demographic. So people buy their aspirational identity. They also buy, Josh always talks about transformation, community, and status. And the thing I'm thinking about here is status, right? So like whatever that status is, in Portland, you want to be like the one with the most tattoos and like the coolest stuff from the thrift shop. That's the status that they're buying. So like, that's the feel of maybe the studio that you have there. In like a Shishi area, they're buying this status of like, I can afford this $3,000 membership and I want, someone to like wipe my face off with a damp towel after class for me and fan me with a peacock feather. And so whatever it is, like that's why that may work. So whatever it is in your area, in your market, you can think of what is the status people want? What is the aspirational identity they're going to buy? And then what kind of experience do I want to create to like deliver those things for them? What do you guys think?
I would say, yeah, in addition, in my experience, coming from the eastern part of the United States, opening a studio now years ago in a very conservative area of the United States, it was very difficult for me because I couldn't figure out the language of the community, right? Even though I'd lived here for a period of time, I still didn't really identify with the demographic as a whole. And, it took a long time. So I think what I would say, if you're a studio owner and you're sometimes feeling frustrated with your ability to connect with your community, in other words, what you're teaching and then the lack of receptivity, maybe we should figure out, like look inside and figure out like the types of language that you utilize to present your ideas. In other words, you can teach the same concepts, but make it more receptive to the demographic so that we allow to break down barriers. And sometimes it can be subtle, but often it can be like integrated into your brand so that in other words, there's an uptake of the community up to what you're offering. And there's no sense of that's different than who I am. Right. And so that eventually over time, you'll find that your students will uptake what you're teaching, they'll take it in and then they'll reiterate your brand to their community in a language that you've provided them that makes them feel safe. And I know that's sort of a unique situation, but it's not really. If you travel around to different parts of the world, when people are like throwing in a yoga studio and people, maybe it's a suburb or what have you, and it takes time sometimes. So I think most importantly, if you're a studio owner and you feel frustration and a teacher, and you're teaching concepts and the student base is not necessarily getting what you have, maybe look at how we're teaching it in the language we're teaching in order to integrate better.
And also, I think too that you have to be also connecting to, yes, and you have to be your authentic self, right? Because I am like, and this is one of the reasons I resonate with Bikram and was attracted to Bikram, is it's very much like my personality, right? It's no bullshit, just get the fucking work done. No excuses. It's not airy fairy. It's no this, that, and no disrespect to those types of practices. It just doesn't resonate with me. I go to those type of studios and it's just like, ugh, it's fingers on the chalkboard for me. So therefore, I could never have that type of ethos in my studio because that just wasn't authentic to me. Right. So I think it also is a balance of knowing your market, knowing your demographic, and knowing what your authentic self is. Because if you're going in and trying to be someone that is not your authentic self, then right from the get-go, there's going to be a disconnect between you and your business. And that's never a good place to be. Kind of, we talk about the yoga brain and the business brain have to be congruent and harmony when making, decisions. The same thing is your self-identity needs to be congruent with your business's identity. At least that's what I believe. Now, some people might argue differently, but I feel particularly as when you're owning your own business, it's, again, small business. And here's the thing. I still believe this is true. In the US, they classify small business as anything less than $10 million. So, so let's face it. So small business is a really big range. Maybe it's more even like micro small I think then that is even more. It's like, I think the smaller the business, the more it is about the personality. Oh, there's a little feet there. More about the personality of the owner. And if you're trying to suppress your own personality, then I don't think that's can be health. That's not very healthy for you either. Because how can you live, in that, live that, right? If you're so completely disconnected from what your community is. So I think all of that feeds together too, is just knowing who you are as yourself, and then what does your community want? And then within that community, I'm sure you can find people that if this is what the style of yoga you're teaching, that's who you're going to attract. Because there are people who would come and try Bikram and it just wasn't their deal. And I get it. And although I would challenge people, it's like, oh, I hate hot yoga, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, have you tried it? And they said, no. I said, why don't you come try it in one class?
Most people who hate it haven't tried.
I know, mostly it really, particularly with Bikram. But I do recall one time I invited this guy, and it was a yoga teacher I met at this cafe in downtown Lowell, and we were chatting. I was putting up posters for free yoga. This is before I bought my studio. It was the previous owner. We were putting up, posters for our free open house day, right? And we just started talking to this guy, and he said, yeah, he said, yeah, I'll come. And I could tell, like in the first 5 minutes, this was not for him. However, I was overhearing him afterwards, and I overheard him say to someone, he said, so I said, what do you think of it? He goes, I didn't like it. It's just not like, he said, however, I have a few friends that I think would really like this. So I never saw the guy again, but I really respected him for that, for saying, it's not my jam, but I do, several people whose jam it is. And then kind of going back to what Alex said about creating the vibe that is, as some of you may know, I taught in Hong Kong for about 1.5 years, and it was definitely upscale. It was, and here's the thing, they did not publish their prices at all. It was a mystery. It was absolutely a mystery as to what people paid, because it became a negotiation at the end. And there was no class cards or anything like that. Their minimum membership was 2 years. And then they also sold a lifetime membership. Of course, they were selling the lifetime membership still days right before they closed the studio entirely. So there was a little bit shady there. However, it was that very, very much a curated experience, and it was very high end. So definitely in Hong Kong, you had to have some serious coin to be able to be there. And that's the type of people that came, right? So, and that's the experience they created there. Anyway, so yeah, it's like the locker rooms, the showers, the mats on the floor. They had custom towels on the mats. They had everything. They had the front desk staff. They had yoga angels who were the salespeople. They had the teachers. It was all very posh. It was all very curated. It was all very organized and structured. And that was the experience they created. So, and they did very well till they didn't. I don't know what caused them to fail. I really don't. Probably, who knows, maybe the model didn't work because eventually they did close. They gave all the teachers like 2 weeks to get out of the country. It was pretty intense when it ended. It was pretty intense.
Situation you don't want to ever find yourself in.
Yeah, that situation you don't ever want to find yourself. So I don't know where I was going with that. Just other than that, the experience of what they created there. It was very exclusive. It was definitely very exclusive.
It's a good point that it's not about the style of yoga that you're offering. It's not about the classes you're teaching, or it's, as Alex was saying, it's like the language you use to describe it in your marketing, right? It's the physical experience in the studio around the class. But you can do, a vinyasa flow class or a yin class or a Bikram class. It doesn't matter like the demographic, the area you're in, like what, it doesn't matter, conservative, liberal, like all we know that like all yoga can be good for all types of people. And then you might have those individuals in any class, in any demographic, in any community that is just not their thing and whatever. And it's funny you brought that up, Terry. Like we definitely, I think one of our biggest brand ambassadors like did not like our yoga, loved us, like didn't want to come take class, but like sent tons of people to us too, because like they're like, oh yeah, this is not me. That's fine. Like I actually believe those people are wrong. And they just haven't realized it yet. Because I really think that like, anyway, a little bit biased, but whether or not they are willing to accept that it actually is for them yet, they do realize that it's for their friends.
I would add
cool about the not my jam thing.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I would add too, along those lines is as let's say you're a studio owner and a teacher, and let's say you've had your studio for 10 years, you've been teaching for 15 years. It's always because our studios rely on new students and that whole flow, right? From first month membership, whatever, into our recurring payment. The longer you've been teaching and the more teacher trainings and the more knowledge you have, the farther away you are from your primary avatar, right? As initially. So one of the things we need to do is remember, as we put in new procedure, policy, pricing, language, et cetera, in our space, our website, how the front desk, staff like introduce themselves, to new students. The farther we get away from that with experience, we forget that beginner's mind. And it's really sometimes hard. So it's good to stop yourself and think about what it might be like for somebody at home on the couch who's been thinking about going to yoga for their mental well-being the last 3 months, 6 months, 18 months, finally gets there. And if they walk in and they don't feel this receptive space, just human to human, then they're scared, their aversion, limits go up, walls go up. And so it's just a good thing to continuously remember. I think too, along those lines, a lot of times as business owners, anything, we think from top down and we create like the most efficient system possible, but we don't recognize the user experience. So you need to practice thinking it through and challenge yourself to recognize how it will be experienced all the way from their couch to your studio. And when you do that, you'll start to use a little different language, a little different system, a little different design, what have you. And it's subtle, but it will have an effect.
Yeah, it's such a good point that you said we rely on new students too, right? Like I think a lot of times, especially if you're a studio that has been around for a long time, you start to have your community, your regulars, your people. And often we hear clients like studio owner clients, right? Making decisions or having their decisions guided by like what my people want, what my community wants. And they're thinking of their regulars who practice like all the time and have been there for 7 years. But you should know that like the average life expectancy for a member in your studio is actually around 6 months. So you need to be continually bringing in those new people, even though it feels like Fred and Janet have been there for like since you opened. They have, but only Fred and Janet. So like you really need to keep cycling through bringing in new students, because it's, even if people love you, they move, like stuff happens. So, like just keep that in mind. You really do want to know what that new student experience is and make it welcoming, whoever, if you're going to be that $3,000 a month fancy pants studio in New York, like they better feel super welcome, the clients that you're trying to bring in. And, you know, and if you're not that studio, like your target audience should feel really welcome and like they belong when they come in. And when you work with a coach, one of the things that we're going to do is actually make you write down your first visit flow and what actually happens step by step from, as Alex said, their couch to like they leave after class and get a follow-up communication from you, that whole thing. And then we're going to have you audit that. We're going to help you audit that and make sure that it is following like exactly the steps that are going to make for an amazing client experience that will then make them want to come back. I know you have your hand up, Terry. I was going to toss it over to you next. Maybe this is what you're going to talk about. So just the human connection thing.
Yes, I was going to talk about that.
So,
but before I talk about that, I also said to Alex's point about, you know, new students, Teresa, our colleague Teresa, did a fabulous webinar last month on the curse of knowledge, right? So if you haven't seen, and I will link that in, I'll make a note right now, curse of knowledge. I'll link that. I'll put that link for those of you on the premium membership. You can watch the recording. And if you're not on a premium membership, maybe you should be, so you can watch all our amazing recordings, because Teresa did a great job at talking about that exact thing. And, you know, and I also want to say, I've said this before, and when talking about the first visit flow, and sometimes you get reluctance from your staff to do things in the first visit flow. And I had firsthand experience with this is, and I've been doing on-sites with Josh this year, and I see it when we go into studios, is the teachers say, oh, I want to connect with the community. And what they mean is they want to correct with the Fred and Sue's that have been there for 7-8 years, the people they know. In the meantime, they're saying they're not even talking to the people that are the new students, right? Or maybe they're talking with the first time students, but they're not talking to the students that are in that initial period. So in essence, they're creating a clique. They're being very exclusive instead of very inclusive. And it's the exact opposite of what I know that the teacher wants. They're not thinking that. They're thinking, oh, I'm connecting with my community, but they're connecting with the people that have been there forever and a day, not with all the new people. On Kay's point, average membership is about 6 months. So if you think about it, every 6 months, your studio is constantly turning over in terms of practitioners. So just something to keep in mind. Alex, do you want to finish up before I segue into?
Yeah, I just want to say one of the things too is like it is initially with new students, we do need to talk, let's say, call it to them, like show them and the path, right? Like this is how you might experience your first class. But what happens is during the introductory month or the first 6 weeks, what happens is we don't always have enough time and space to hear from them. So, and then when they do leave, we're not really sure why. So I think that it is imperative that we get creative as studio owners to find ways in which to understand how they're experiencing your service and listening to their experience so that they felt heard. As soon as a student feels heard and understood, now they feel safe, and they also will maintain a practice probably longer than normal. So you can do this in a very can happen in the studio, can happen somewhat digitally with a Q&A or a form, a questionnaire. Or it can happen like if we see people dropping off membership at 4 months or what have you. At 3 months, we could have an opportunity to have all students at 3 months on membership have like one-on-one with a studio owner or small group environment for Q&A, like unique ways to touch them, but really create space for them to voice how things are going.
And that's a perfect segue into what I was going to talk about today. I was reading an article, speaking of articles, on how a lot of people coming out of the pandemic, right, and particularly the younger generations, but all up and down the generations, but particularly the younger generations that are like disconnecting, unplugging from technology, because what they're craving is connection, personal one-on-one connection. And interestingly enough, what they consider personal one-on-one connection is, guess what? Phone calls. So I have been working with a lot of my clients on adding phone calls into their retention campaign, not exclusive of what type of intro offer. It's not an issue what the intro offer is. It's an issue of the sales and retention process, right? So adding in phone calls, and a couple of my clients that have been doing this they're saying to me, and just yesterday, one of my clients said they're working. The phone calls are working. And in some cases, the owner's making the calls, in other cases, not. And I also think there is the one woman yesterday, my client yesterday I was talking to, she's the owner and loves making these phone calls. And people are blown away by the fact that the owner is calling them, because she always identifies herself as, I'm the owner, hi, I'm Terry, I own the Hot Yoga Factory, right? So they're blown away by that. Even if even if you don't, and what I coach my clients to is, even if you don't get them on the phone, you leave a voice message. And based on this article I read, and again, I'll link the article in the comments as well, is that particularly women are particularly, and that's not unusual in terms of, the characteristics of identifying female, right? And femininity. If you go back to the days, it's like the women taking care of the kids, the nurturers, they talk together, whereas the men are off on the plains killing the animals and bringing them back, right? So a little more solo versus more group. It's a little bit hardwired into our DNA, into our genetic makeup. And so that people are craving that, particularly women, is that voice to voice. So if you don't have phone calls in your process, I say throw them in there, see what happens. And not only, if we know, when we do know this, we know that people tend to fall off membership somewhere as average as 4 to 6 months. And if you're doing your KPIs, have to always work KPIs in there, guys. If you're doing your KPIs and you know what your average months on membership is, what about putting a phone call in? If you know that your average membership is like 4.5 months, what are you doing at the end of month 3 or the beginning of month 4, right? That can be a really good time to make a phone call. And to what Alex just said, that's where you could have some type of just form and asking questions and hearing them, because he's right. People want to be heard more than anything. People want to be heard. So that's something you can do too, is just a phone call and just, hey, want to check in. Do you have any questions, any feedback? We're here to support you, whatever it is. That is a high touch point, right? And so think about layering in some phone calls. And again, script them out. Well, we help you script them out so that whether you or your front desk or whoever's making the call, and I know it can sound a little robotic at first. However, I can tell you from personal experience that if they say it often enough, just like the first visit flow, eventually they say it more fluidly. And it's not like, it doesn't have to be necessarily verbatim, unlike grab your exactly opposite elbows over your head. Bikram joke, is it becomes more fluid for them. And then you script out what they're going to say if they get them live. I had a script for if they get the person live, at least initially. And then obviously they would ask questions, they had a series of questions, and then they can answer the questions. And then I had a script if they got the voicemail, identifying that they're calling from and just checking in and how things are going. And even though rarely would people call back, but what I would hear at the studio is, wow, Ellie, I got your phone message the other day. Thanks for calling. It was so nice of you to call and check on me. Right. So that's why you always want to leave a voicemail. And so it's not just, it's email. It's a combination of all of that. It's email, it's text, it's phone calls, it's in studio. Those are all the things that need to be happening all the time, not just for new clients, but for existing clients. That's how you get the Fred and Sue's, right? That are there 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, I know that I have clients that have been open for, 20 years, and some of them have clients that have been coming for 20 years. So those are the things. So add some phone calls in. If you're not, add some in, see what happens, track it, make a tracker, right? It can be just a simple sheet. Terry comes in, her first day is April 7th. We're going to make a phone call on the 25th. We're going to make a phone call on May, whatever. Just put it in a tracker. Yes, it's manual. It's worth it. And if you're using something like BrandBot, you can even add it into the automation, which is actually pretty cool. So if you're using something like BrandBot in that email marketing automation, you can have the very bottom says add an auto action, right? And at the auto action could be a phone call, and you can even put right there in the notes what the script is. And then when someone logs into BrandBot, whoever's making these calls, they just see, okay, here are the calls that need to be made. And then you can check that was made, and you can check the outcome. Right. So I chose to use Mind Body Contact Logs for this just because I wanted everything in contact logs. But whatever your system is, just do it and see what happens. Just like Nike says, just do it. Oh, and did you hear Michael, the Air dropped? I'm going to see it this weekend. The movie about Nike and Michael Jordan. Yeah, it looks, if you haven't seen the previews, it looks real. Ben Affleck and Matt Damon back together again. I'm going to see this weekend. And Viola Davis is playing Michael Jordan's mom. And apparently that was his one stipulation I heard, is that he would only agree to it if Viola Davis played his mother. So I'm going to be going to see that tomorrow night with my sister. So anyway, that's my rant on making phone calls. Okay.
I love it. Now I understand. Okay. I don't have TV or anything. So like, just all of a sudden people keep making references to like Air Jordans and like Air and stuff like that. Now I'm like, where is that coming from? Now I understand. So thank you.
Now you understand it.
You learn something on every roundup.
Roundup, right.
Okay. So I love all this about phone calls, and I totally agree. It is really, really powerful when the owner does it. And often when we suggest this to owners, they're like, I don't have time, right? Like, I don't want to do that, or I just don't like talking on the phone, whatever it is. This is actually how I got my start in yoga business. I was a work trade, and my job was at Bikram Yoga San Jose. My job was to call everybody on their intro and just check in with them. And this was like a really long time ago. So I don't even know if they had contact logs, but like, I had a piece of paper. And it was like a Microsoft Word doc with a table on it, so there was like a grid, and it just had the person's name and like the date I was supposed to call, and I had to write down notes. So whatever your system is, I totally agree. Like, and I didn't really have a script, but it was kind of like I was good at it, I guess. But I would definitely advise you to have a script, have somebody who's good at it, so they read the script, not like a robot, and always track it. Because one of the things actually at that time that like I found out, just from like, it was a total curiosity call. This is not a sales call. That's the other thing that's really, really powerful about reaching out to someone during their intro and not trying to sell them anything. Is they're bracing. If they pick up the phone and it's the yoga studio, they're on the intro, they think you're going to try to sell them something because they have been trained by other yoga studios and gyms. This is a cold call, right? So you do not try to sell them anything. You just want to hear from them, as Alex was talking about, like, let them be heard. So in chatting with multiple students and writing it down every time, we found that they had a lot of people who were driving all the way from Mountain View because they were the closest studio. So guess what? Then one of the teachers, in a totally like Cynthia Ware, ended up opening a studio later in Mountain View. And this was totally like, Michelle was on board with that and everything. Like, they were their best friends and stuff. So they realized like, oh, there's actually a need for another studio. This is a big enough market and it's far enough away and the traffic is bad enough. And so they then had 2 very successful studios in that area. So you never know what you're going to find out. And it doesn't have to be the owner necessarily who does it. If you just don't have the bandwidth or want to do that, it's actually a really good position for somebody, maybe, going back to, are you the working man studio or are you the high class studio? If you're more in like a working class area, you might have people who really want to practice with you and literally cannot afford the membership. So here's an opportunity. Maybe somebody would want to do this as a trade situation. Maybe we don't open that whole can of worms.
No, I think that's I totally wholeheartedly agree. And one of the things I would say is, in the interview process, what I did for my front desk staff is, when I was hiring, is the initial interview was a 15-minute phone interview, because I wanted to see how they sounded on the phone. right? Because they were going to be making phone calls. So I wanted to see how they came across on the phone. And and I eliminated people that way. Right. Because then the candidates that passed we did the meet and greet, the one-on-one interview. So I would definitely talk to people on the phone. If you're having someone else make phone calls, then definitely do an interview on the phone. And then to case point two, if as the owner, you don't have the bandwidth, I get it, and you don't want to do it. What if you did this instead? You had people make those beginning phone calls in that first phase. Like, again, I had 3 phone calls that they made. One was the check-in call, and it was, like Kay said, purely a check-in call. It was, soliciting feedback, just checking in, offering to book their next class, also looking to see how many classes they had taken, and then, reaching out. Then the second phone call was about a week before, because I did the, not direct to membership, it was intro, offer, upsell. Then the second phone call was they would look to see, did they buy the membership via the brand bot email? And sometimes they did, but I'll tell you, the majority of people signed up for the membership right at the front desk. They would check to see, and if they had purchased the membership, then it became a thank you call. Hey, we're so excited that blah, blah, blah. If it wasn't, then they would make the offer, just, hey, want to make sure that you saw our special offer, da, da, da. And then the third phone call, then after that, was if they would check again, if they purchased the membership and the thank you call had already been made, then they wouldn't make the call. If they hadn't purchased anything, if they had purchased the membership or even our Hail Mary, the 10-pack, then it was a thank you call. And then if they still hadn't purchased anything, then we would try one more time to see if we couldn't get them to buy, we had a special pack for that. Right. So that was the cadence that I did. So have someone do that. And then perhaps as the owner, you're the one that's making that drop off call when you know that point where the membership drops off. Like maybe 3 months into their membership, you pick up the phone and you call and you thank them for being a member. And as that could be something that if you're not wanting to do, or you don't have the bandwidth, or it's not although I would challenge you, if you don't like to make phone calls, get over it. You're an owner of a business. You should be able to call your clients and talk to them. I'm just saying, Alex.
Yeah, I would say I definitely had this role in my studio for many, many, many years. And things that I learned, I think probably a lot of studios have done this. And they've tried it for like 6-8 months when they had somebody in place. And then they didn't really measure it, and they didn't really know the effect of it. And then they kind of waned from it. Now they're thinking about getting back, or they're looking back like, oh, that just never worked. One thing I would say is that with respect to the specific role, it's essential that you have somebody that's somewhat of an ambassador of your space. It may sound obvious, but a lot of times as studio owners, we need somebody, we need staff, right? So we see someone who's organized, articulate, and ready to go, but yet they're not an ambassador of the space, right? So they come up to do the job, but they're not like in your classes and really experiencing your space weekly. And then the other thing is you could look for one of the best people that I hired was working at a massage space that was a national chain. And she was a sales person in charge of like a group sales team. And she used the same software. And so she was very familiar with contact logs and organization. And she was she really understood the functionality. So what we're talking about is 2 different things. You have to understand the function of the sales and the what, why, and how, but also you have to have like a connection to the space and the services that you're offering. And so if you're a studio that's done this in the past and hasn't had great success with it, maybe look back and really, did you have a true job description written out and really figure out the type of person and their skill sets and really define those responsibilities? Because once you have the right person, it can be very exponential. The other thing I would add is that you do have to play with the time of day that you call. You will get a lot of calls that go to voicemail. To your point, the script is important there. And remember that even if 1 out of 10 people answer, the impact that you've had on that one person, even though 9 didn't answer, is huge, because they literally will turn around to friends and family and say, I can't believe the studio, they just checked in with me. Wow. How did they know they needed, so don't be discouraged, find the right person, and it's a really effective tool.
And it sure is about the time of day. I found that actually we would make the calls before my schedule was like 4:30, 6:30-ish, 4:30 or 5, depending on the type of class. And we found that time of day was we had a better pickup rate where people actually answered their phone as opposed to going straight to voicemail, right? And that's the other thing too, making sure that your phone number says the studio that you're calling from. So then they can see that, oh, this is the yoga studio. You might have a better chance. Because I know personally, I don't pick up the phone. If I don't know the number, I don't pick it up. I let it go to voicemail because I figure if they really want to talk to me, they're going to leave me a voicemail. And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't, because it's just a robocall, right? So that's the other thing, making sure that just logistically is that the phone number they're calling from says the name of the business, so that they know, oh, this is a phone call from the Hot Yoga Factory or whatever, That's another thing. You might have a little bit better chance. But I found, I don't know, interesting. If you are making phone calls, post in the comments, when do you find is the best time to make phone calls? For me, like I said, it was right in that 4 to 6 window. That seemed to be a really good time where we got the highest success of actually getting people on the phone live.
Same, Jerry. It was about the same. We had like a 5 and a 7 p.m. class. And as soon as the 5 p.m. class, and a lot of times, like when studios are looking at hiring studio assistants or front desk for the first time, the question we get on coaching calls is like, what else do I have them do? Like, I have them check in the class, and then what? Then the class goes in, then they call people at the 5 p.m. class. That was definitely, we got the most responses then. Sometimes they would even like come into the studio at that time too. So it's really good to have somebody like at the desk at that time doing stuff. And there's so many other, that's maybe for another roundup. We could talk about all the other stuff you can have them do, because it is literally a very long list.
Yeah, if you have someone, if you hire someone, they said, I don't know, I ran out of things to do, then now there's, like Kate said, there's always stuff that can be done. I had lists.
If you got time to lean, you got time to clean.
Exactly.
Is that a hashtag Terry's dad? Or is that that's hashtag Mama K, maybe?
I think that's hashtag Mama K. But the hashtag Terry's dad would be, you never wanted to say, I'm bored. That was the worst thing you could say when we grew up. Yeah. I'm bored. My father said, oh, you're bored, here, I'll find you something to do. So we learned really quickly never to say I'm bored. Yes. And then when I worked for him, absolutely busy, there was always something to do. Always. Like in retail, dusting, grab a dust cloth and dust the shelves, right? It's the same thing in yoga studio. You can always go clean the bathroom. You can always do this. There's always stuff you can do. Anyway, but yeah.
All right, you guys, good talk. Anything more to say on these notes? We went from like, should you have this like super fancy dancy $3,000 a month membership, owning who you are, human connection. One thing I said I was going to mention and didn't. Let's see if Satya lets me. Josh just posted a really interesting video in the YC. It's like 20 minutes. You can like cook dinner while listening to it or whatever. Go find it. We'll link it in the comments about what does all this AI stuff mean for your yoga business. And here, I'll just throw this out as food for thought in relation to that. And I think Josh would probably agree that this is not only is it an opportunity for you to use AI to get stuff done in your business potentially, it's also a really big opportunity for you as a yoga business